The scent hit her first, a blizzard of pine and cold stone that hadn't belonged in these woods for 10 long years. It slammed into her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs and making the meager fire in her hearth sputter as if in fear. Ilara dropped the worn leather she was mending, her heart seizing in her chest. Before she could even rise from her rickety stool, the cabin door splintered inward, torn from its hinges and tossed aside like a dry leaf. And there he stood, framed by the dying light of dusk, a silhouette of vengeance she had prayed every night she would never see again. He was bigger, broader, a man carved from the unforgiving mountains that had swallowed him whole. A jagged scar sliced through one eyebrow, and his eyes, once the warm gray of a summer storm, were now the flat, merciless gray of chipped granite. The boy she had broken was gone. In his place stood an alpha, power rolling off him in waves that made the very floorboards tremble. And behind him, the silent, hungry shadows of his new pack. He took one step inside her tiny, impoverished world, his gaze sweeping over the threadbare blanket on her cot, the half-eaten loaf of stale bread on the table, and finally landing on her. His lip curled, not in a sneer, but in something far more terrifying, something that looked like ownership. The whispers had been true. Cale was back, and he had come for her. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble that vibrated through her bones, deeper and rougher than the one she held in her memory. They said I would find you living in filth, Ilara, a traitor's due. He didn't raise his voice, yet it carried over the shocked gasps of the Blackwood pack members who had gathered behind his wolves, drawn by the commotion. Her people, the ones who had shunned her for a decade. Ilara forced herself to her feet, her legs shaking so violently she had to grip the back of the chair to stay upright. "Cale," she breathed, the name a shard of glass in her throat. He took another step, the scent of him overwhelming her, filling the small space with the wild, untamed power of his new life. "Alpha, Cale," he corrected, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't earn my name and my strength in the darkness just for you to forget my station." From the crowd, Lachlan, her father's former beta, and the man who now vied for control of their weakened pack, stepped forward. "You have no station here, rogue," Lachlan spat, his hand on the hilt of the silver knife at his belt. "You were exiled. Your return is a declaration of war." Cale didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely, terrifyingly on Ilara. "War?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "This is not war. This is a reckoning." He moved again, closing the distance until he was towering over her. She had to crane her neck back to see his face, to see the cold fury etched into features that were once so dear to her. He reached out, not to strike her, but to gently trail a single calloused finger down her cheek. The touch was an electric shock, a ghost of a caress that promised pain. "The Blackwood pack is mine now. Its lands, its people, its debts." His gaze flickered with a dangerous light. "And you, my sweet little liar, are the biggest debt of all." Fear was a living thing, clawing its way up her throat. This was it. the moment she had dreaded for 3,652 days. He would kill her here in front of everyone, a public execution to solidify his claim and avenge his past. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But the killing blow never came. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, his warm breath a stark contrast to the icy dread flooding her veins. "They all expect me to kill you," he whispered, his voice a gravelly secret just for her. "They think I came back for revenge." He pulled back just enough for her to see the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Revenge is too simple. It ends. I want something that lasts." Before anyone could process his words, he raised his voice to address the stunned onlookers, his hand moving from her cheek to wrap firmly around her arm. "As Alpha of the Stonecrest Pack, I am merging our territories with the Blackwood lands under my sole command. Any who challenge me will be put down." His gaze swept the crowd, daring a single wolf to move. None did. They were mesmerized, terrified by the sheer force of his will. Then his eyes returned to Elara, and he delivered the final, devastating blow. "And I am taking what I was denied 10 years ago. I am claiming my mate." The world tilted. A collective, disbelieving gasp rippled through the crowd. Lachlan's face went purple with rage. Mate? The word was an absurdity, a cruel joke that made no sense. She had rejected him, betrayed him, sent him away, with a lie that had branded him a criminal. Their bond, if it ever truly existed, should have been shattered. "No," she whispered, the word lost in the roaring of blood in her ears. Cale's grip on her arm tightened, pulling her flush against his hard body. He smelled of power, of a world without mercy. "Oh yes," he murmured, his voice a low, possessive growl that sent shivers of terror and some other, more ancient, more confusing emotion through her. "You don't get to run from this, Elara. You don't get to hide. You are mine. You have always been mine. And you will stand by my side as my Luna while I rebuild everything your father destroyed." He looked out at the sea of faces, his expression one of absolute, unshakable command. "Take her to the Alpha's house. Put her in the Luna's chambers. She is not to leave until I summon her." 2 of his wolves, huge and scarred, moved to flank her. They didn't touch her, but their presence was a cage of muscle and teeth. Elara's mind was a maelstrom of confusion and fear. This wasn't revenge. This was a prison sentence. A gilded cage where she would be a constant, living trophy of his victory. He was chaining her to him, forcing her to witness his triumph while she wore the title that should have been a blessing, but was now a curse. As his wolves began to lead her away from her hovel and toward the life she had forfeited, she looked back at him. He hadn't moved. He just stood there, the new Alpha, the king of their broken world, watching her with eyes that held a decade of darkness and a promise of something far more complex and painful than simple vengeance. The Alpha's house was a place of ghosts. It was the house of her father, Alpha Marcus, a man whose cruelty had been matched only by his ambition. It was the house where KL had been a stable-hand son, his potential shining even then, a threat her father had been determined to extinguish. It was the house where she, as the Alpha's daughter, had lived a privileged but suffocating life. Now it was KL's. He had changed it. The oppressive, dark woods and heavy tapestries of her father's reign were gone. The style was Spartan, clean, and functional. Furs were draped over chairs, weapons were mounted on the walls, and the air hummed with a quiet, disciplined energy. It was the den of a predator who had built his throne from scratch. Her chambers, the Luna's chambers, a title that felt like acid on her tongue, were opulent in a way her small cabin made her forget was possible. A huge bed with a mountain of pillows, a balcony overlooking the moon-drenched valley, a bathing room with a tub big enough for two. But it felt like a cage. The windows didn't open more than a few inches, and one of Kale's stoic guards was posted outside her door at all times. For 3 days, she saw no one but the silent Omega female who brought her meals. She tried to speak to the guard, to the Omega, but they refused to meet her eyes, their faces a mixture of fear and contempt. She was the traitor, now inexplicably elevated. It made no sense to them, and even less to her. The solitude was a torment, giving her too much time to think, to remember. She remembered the night of the betrayal with searing clarity. The chill in the air, the scent of her father's rage. He'd found out about her secret meetings with Kale. He'd seen the nascent mate bond shimmering between them, a bond between his precious daughter and a low-born boy with too much ambition. "You will end it," her father had commanded, his voice cold as steel. "You will tell the pack he forced himself on you. You will cry, and you will make them believe it. He will be exiled, shamed. If you refuse, I will have my enforcers hunt him down in the woods and leave his carcass for the crows. His life is in your hands, Alara. Choose." She had chosen his life. She had met him by the old willow tree, their spot, and she had spoken the lies that had shattered him. The look in his eyes, the confusion, the hurt, the dawning horror, was a brand of her soul. She'd watched as her father's warriors had chased him from their lands, a boy of 17, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a lie that painted him a monster. She had saved his life by destroying it. On the evening of the 3rd day, the door opened. It wasn't the Omega with her food, it was Kale. He stood there, filling the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the room. He had changed from his travel-worn leathers into simple black trousers and a gray shirt that stretched across the powerful muscles of his chest and shoulders. He looked every bit the alpha in command. "Enjoying your accommodations?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. Alara stood up from the window seat, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What is this, Kael? Why am I here? Why this charade?" "There is no charade," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The click of the latch echoed like a cell door locking. "You are my mate. This is your place." "I am not your mate. I rejected you." The words felt like a lie, even as she said them. The pull toward him, the low thrum of the bond that had miraculously survived the years and the betrayal, was a constant hum beneath her skin. He moved toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, like a wolf stalking its prey. "Did you?" he murmured, his eyes searching hers for the truth he had been denied for a decade. "Your words said one thing, but the bond never broke. It was faint, stretched thin across mountains and years of hate, but it was there, a constant, infuriating whisper in the back of my mind. Why do you think I never took another? I was still chained to you." He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the testament to a hard life lived under open skies and constant threat. "Why?" he asked, his voice dropping to a raw, aching whisper that was more unsettling than his anger. "That's all I want to know, Ilara. After everything, I think I've earned the truth. Why did you do it? Did you hate me so much? Was my blood not pure enough for the precious Alpha's daughter?" The old fear, the ingrained terror of her father's threat rose up in her. Even with her father dead and buried for 2 years, the conditioning remained. Protect Kyle. The lie protects Kyle. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice trembling. His jaw tightened, the muscle there flexing in anger. "That is not an answer." He reached out and grabbed her chin, his grip firm but not painful, forcing her to look at him. "You stood before the pack and called me an animal. You accused me of attacking you. Your words sent me into exile, hunted with a price on my head. I slept in frozen caves and fought rabid rogues for scraps of meat. I built a pack from the cast-offs and the broken, clawing my way to power one bloody battle at a time. All of it fueled by the memory of your face as you lied." His thumb stroked her lower lip. "So you will give me a better answer than that." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She couldn't tell him, she still couldn't. Her father's ghost felt too real, his threats echoing in the lavish room. The lie had become a part of her, a shield she didn't know how to lower. She shook her head, pulling away from his touch. "I can't." A muscle feathered in his jaw. For a moment she saw the boy he'd been, a flicker of raw, unbearable hurt in his granite eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of the Alpha. "Very well," he said, his voice flat and hard once more. "If you will not give me the truth of the past, you will live with the reality of the present." He turned and walked toward the door. "We will be holding a formal ceremony in 3 days. The pack needs to see its Luna. You will stand beside me, and you will smile, and you will play the part of the devoted mate." "And if I refuse?" she challenged, her voice rising. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, looking at her over his shoulder. The look in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. "Then I will remind the Blackwood Wolves what happens to traitors. I have been lenient so far. I have not purged your father's loyalists. I have not made an example of those who scorn you in the halls." He let the threat hang in the air. "Your compliance buys their safety. Every time you defy me, Ilara, you are gambling with the lives of the people who already hate you." "Do you really want to be responsible for their blood, too?" He didn't wait for an answer. He left, the door closing with a final, definitive thud. Ilara sank onto the floor, wrapping her arms around herself. He had built her the most beautiful prison, and he had just handed her the key. A key forged from her own guilt, designed to ensure she would never, ever use it. He wasn't just claiming her as a mate. He was using her as a tool of control, a symbol to the pack. And the worst part, the part that made her soul ache, was that she knew she would do exactly as he said. Because even after everything, her first instinct was still to protect others from the fallout of her own broken past. The next 2 days were a blur of preparations. The same Omega who brought her food now brought her gowns of silk and velvet, fabrics she hadn't touched since her father's death. She was fitted for dresses, shown jewels, and treated with a cold, formal deference that was more isolating than outright hostility. Kale was a phantom, his presence felt throughout the packhouse, but never seen by her. She heard his commands echoing in the halls, saw the swift, efficient way his pack integrated with hers, quelling any dissent with quiet, intimidating force. He was a born leader, a natural alpha, everything her father had tried to be through fear and bluster. The worst part, the part that made her soul ache, was that she knew she would do exactly as he said. Because even after everything, her first instinct was still to protect others from the fallout of her own broken past. The next 2 days were a blur of preparations. The same Omega who brought her food now brought her gowns of silk and velvet, fabrics she hadn't touched since her father's death. She was fitted for dresses, shown jewels, and treated with a cold, formal deference that was more isolating than outright hostility. Kale was a phantom, his presence felt throughout the pack house, but never seen by her. She heard his commands echoing in the halls, saw the swift, efficient way his pack integrated with hers, quelling any dissent with quiet, intimidating force. He was a born leader, a natural alpha, everything her father had tried to be through fear and bluster. The night before the ceremony, she was standing on her balcony, staring out at the vast, dark forest. It was the same forest she and Kale used to sneak into, dreaming of a future that now seemed like a cruel fantasy. A soft knock came at her door, and before she could answer, it opened. It wasn't Kale. It was an older woman, her face lined with wisdom and sorrow. Ilara recognized her instantly. It was Lyra, Kale's mother. Ilara's heart lurched. She hadn't seen the woman in 10 years, not since the day her son was cast out. "Lyra," Ilara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lyra's expression was unreadable. She walked slowly into the room, her eyes taking in Ilara's fine clothes and the luxurious surroundings. "They call you the Luna to be," she said, her voice raspy with age. "The she-wolf who sent my son to his death, now rewarded with a crown." "It's not like that," Ilara started, taking a step toward her. "Isn't it?" Lyra held up a hand. "I did not come here for excuses. I came to look into the eyes of the girl who broke my boy and see if there is anything left of her soul." She came closer, her dark eyes, so much like Kale's, searching Ilara's face. "He was a good boy. Fierce and strong, yes, but good. He loved you. He would have torn down the sky for you." The words were like daggers. "I know," Ilara choked out. "Do you?" Lyra's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "He came back a different man. The world he lived in, it burns away the good. It leaves only what is necessary to survive. He is hard now, cold, and he is obsessed with you. He talks of control, of possession. But I see him when he does not know I am looking. He watches this house, this room. There is more than vengeance in him, Ilara. There is a wound that has never closed." Lyra reached into the pocket of her simple dress and pulled out a small, carved wooden wolf, its surface worn smooth with time. Ilara gasped. Kale had carved it for her on her 16th birthday. She thought it had been lost. "He kept this," Lyra said softly, placing it in Ilara's trembling hand. "Through starvation and battles and exile, he kept this. A man who wants only revenge does not hold on to a memory of love." She looked at Ilara, her eyes pleading. "Whatever secrets you are holding, whatever walls you have built, I beg you to tear them down. My son has returned, but I fear I have lost him all the same. Perhaps, the girl he loved is the only one who can bring him back." Lyra turned and left as silently as she had arrived, leaving Ilara clutching the small wolf. The wood was warm in her hand, a tangible piece of a past she thought was dead. Lyra's words echoed in the silent room. A wound that has never closed. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the balcony doors. She saw a pale, haunted woman in a borrowed gown. But for the first time in a decade, she also saw the girl who had made an impossible choice. The girl who had loved Kyle enough to destroy him and herself in the process. Kyle's plan, his cold and calculated form of torment, was to chain her to his side. But perhaps the chain went both ways. He was wounded, and she held the truth that could either be the salt in that wound or the balm that healed it. Telling him would mean facing his explosive rage, the fury of a man who hated her for a sacrifice. It could shatter the fragile, terrifying peace they now had. But not telling him meant leaving him in the dark, allowing the cold, hard Alpha to consume the last remnants of the boy she had loved. She clutched the wooden wolf to her chest. She had a new choice to make. The ceremony was a grand affair held in the Great Hall. The entire pack, a tense mix of Kyle's hardened Stonecrest wolves and the wary Blackwood members, was assembled. A fire roared in the massive hearth, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. Kyle stood on a raised dais, looking every inch the conquering Alpha. He wore black leather trimmed with dark fur, and the power radiating from him was a palpable force that demanded silence and respect. When Elara entered, a hush fell over the hall. She wore a deep emerald green gown that Lyra's Omega servant had insisted upon, claiming it brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was intricately braided with silver clasps. To the outside world, she looked like a queen. Inside, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She kept her chin high, her expression carefully neutral, just as he had commanded. She walked the length of the hall, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. She felt their scorn, their confusion, their fear. She walked toward Kyle, the man who was her captor and her destiny, her past and her terrifying present. When she reached the dais, he extended a hand to her. His touch was electric, a jolt of energy that shot up her arm. He pulled her to his side, his arm wrapping around her waist in a gesture that was both supportive and possessive. "My wolves," he began, his voice booming through the hall, "and wolves of the Blackwood Pack. Tonight, we unite not just our lands, but our leadership. For 10 years, this pack has withered under a weak and uncertain rule since the death of Marcus. No more. We will be strong again. We will be a force to be reckoned with." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting Elara's. His gray eyes were like a storm, turbulent and unreadable. "And every Alpha needs his Luna, a wolf to ground him, to temper his strength with wisdom." He raised her hand, the one he was holding, to his lips and brushed a soft kiss across her knuckles, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle it made her breath catch. The crowd murmured, surprised. "Elara was promised to me long ago," he continued, his voice resonating with conviction. "A bond forged by destiny was broken by the lies of a tyrant. Tonight, we correct that wrong. Tonight, we reclaim what is ours." He was rewriting history, painting her not as a traitor, but as a fellow victim of her father's schemes. It was a masterful political move, a way to quell the pack's animosity toward her and solidify their joint rule, but it was built on a half-truth, and it chafed at her. Just as he was about to complete the ritual, a voice cut through the tension. "This is a sham." Lachlan pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "Are you all blind? He's bewitched you with his power. This is the she-wolf who betrayed him, who betrayed all of us with her lies. She has no honor. She is not fit to be Luna." Several of her father's old loyalists grumbled in agreement. Kale's arm tightened around Elara's waist, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You are out of line, Lachlan. Am I? Lachlan sneered, emboldened by the support. You return as a mighty alpha, Kale, but you are a fool. You think you are claiming a prize, but you are shackling yourself to a snake. Ask her why she really did it. It wasn't to save you. It was ambition. She wanted a stronger mate, someone her father approved of. She cast you aside like trash because you were nothing. The words were poison, twisting the truth into a weapon. Elara could feel Kale's entire body go rigid beside her. The doubt, the old pain Lachlan was dredging up, was a palpable thing. She could feel it radiating from him, threatening to shatter his carefully constructed composure. This was her moment. Lyra's words came back to her. Tear down the walls. She gently pulled away from Kale's grasp and took a step forward, facing Lachlan, facing the entire pack. Kale started to reach for her, to pull her back behind him, but she gave a slight shake of her head, a silent plea. To his credit, he hesitated, his hand hovering in the air. You are right about one thing, Lachlan, Elara said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the hall's acoustics. I did lie. 10 years ago, I stood before you and I spoke a lie that cost a good man everything. She turned her gaze to Kale, her heart in her eyes. A lie that I have choked on every day since. She looked back at the pack. But you are wrong about why. It was not for ambition. It was not for power. She took a deep breath, the truth sitting on her tongue for the first time. It was because my father, Alpha Marcus, came to me. He told me he knew of our bond, and he gave me a choice. I could publicly reject Kyle, accuse him, and have him exiled. Or I could watch as my father's enforcers hunting him down and killed him for daring to love his Alpha's daughter. A wave of shock and disbelief washed over the crowd. Lachlan's face paled. I lied to save his life, she said, her voice cracking with a decade of unshed tears. I chose to live as a traitor in his eyes rather than see him dead. I broke his heart to keep it beating. I sacrificed his love, my honor, and my entire life for him. Every single day of his exile was a torment for me, but I would make the same choice again because he is alive. He is here. She turned to Kyle, her eyes now streaming with tears she no longer tried to hide. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were a maelstrom of shock, rage, and a pain so profound it mirrored her own. The cold, hard shell of the Alpha he had become was cracking right before her eyes, revealing the wounded heart of the boy he'd been. I'm sorry, Kyle, she whispered. The words meant only for him, though the whole hall heard them. I'm so sorry I didn't trust you enough to fight with you. I was young and I was scared. I'm sorry for the pain my choice caused you, but I am not sorry that you are alive. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Kyle didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at her, the truth of her words washing over him, dismantling a decade of carefully nurtured hatred. The foundation of his return, the vengeance he thought he wanted, had just crumbled into dust. Lachlan, seeing his power play backfire spectacularly, went for broke. She lies, he roared, pulling the silver knife from his belt. She's a manipulative witch trying to save her own skin. He lunged, not at Kyle, but at Elara. He was fast, but Kyle was faster. The Alpha moved like a blur of shadow and fury. He intercepted Lachlan, his arm catching the knife-wielding wrist with a sickening crunch of bone. He didn't just stop him, he disarmed him and slammed him back against the stone dais in a single, fluid motion. The knife clattered to the floor. Kale's hand was around Lachlan's throat, lifting him partially off the ground. His eyes were no longer gray stone. They were blazing silver, his wolf barely contained. "You," Kale snarled, the sound inhumanly deep, "were my father's beta. You stood by and watched him threaten a 17-year-old girl. You knew all these years, and you let her carry that burden. You let me carry that hatred." Lachlan choked, his face turning a blotchy purple. "She deserved it, traitor!" "The only traitor here," Kale growled, "is the one who serves a tyrant and then preys on the victims." He threw Lachlan to the floor at the feet of his Stonecrest guards. "Take him to the cells. He will be dealt with." The guards hauled a sputtering Lachlan away. Kale stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, his control slowly reasserting itself. The hall remained silent, every wolf watching him, watching them. He slowly turned to face Elara. The fury was gone, replaced by an emotion so raw and vulnerable it made her want to weep. He walked toward her, his steps heavy. He stopped in front of her, his eyes tracing her face as if seeing her for the first time. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You did that for me?" he asked, his voice rough with disbelief and a decade of misdirected pain. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. "All this time," he breathed, "all this time I thought I hated you." The admission was a physical blow, a confession of his own torment. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, the last of the ice had melted. In its place was the boy from the willow tree, trapped inside the body of an alpha, finally looking at her with understanding. But the understanding didn't bring peace. It brought a fresh, new wave of agony. The revelation didn't magically heal the 10 years of scars. It simply exposed the true source of the wound, making it raw and open for them both. He took a step back from her, the space between them suddenly feeling like a chasm. I need to think," he said, his voice strained. He turned away from her, from the pack, and strode out of the great hall, leaving her alone on the dais, the truth finally free, and her heart more broken than ever before. The bond was there, thrumming between them, but it was now laced with the agony of shared, misunderstood sacrifice. He knew the truth, but the truth had not set them free. It had simply locked them in a new kind of prison, one built of regret and lost years. For the next week, the pack house was a place of ghosts and shadows. Kale was a ghost. Elara saw him only at a distance, a fleeting figure crossing the courtyard, a commanding voice issuing orders from his study. He did not summon her. He did not come to her. The door to her chambers was no longer guarded, but she felt more trapped than ever. The entire pack seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for their new alpha to decide the fate of the woman who was both his greatest love and his deepest wound. The animosity toward her from the Blackwood wolves had lessened, replaced by a sort of pity and confusion. Lyra was the only one who sought her out, bringing her meals herself, sitting with her in a comfortable silence that was more soothing than any words. "He is wrestling with demons he didn't know he had," Lyra said, watching Elara pick at her food. "It is one thing to be fueled by the fire of a betrayal. It is another to learn that the fire was lit by love." "He hates me more now, doesn't he?" Elara whispered, staring at the small wooden wolf on her nightstand, "for letting him suffer in ignorance." "He does not hate you," Lyra corrected gently. He hates the man he had to become to survive that suffering, and he doesn't know how to be anyone else. Ilara knew she was right. She had seen it in his eyes in the Great Hall, a shattering of his own identity. The cold, vengeful Alpha was a persona forged in the crucible of her lie. Without that lie to sustain it, who was he? Her own guilt had shifted. It was no longer the heavy burden of her betrayal, but the sharp pain of his lost years. She thought of him alone in the wilderness, a boy fighting for his life, hating her, and her heart ached with a ferocity that was almost unbearable. She had saved his body, but had allowed his soul to be poisoned. One night, unable to bear the suffocating silence of her chambers any longer, she walked through the sleeping packhouse. The moonlight guided her steps toward the one place she knew she might find him, his study. It had been her father's office, a place of fear. The door was slightly ajar, and a single lamp cast a warm glow from within. She peered inside. Kyle was there, slumped in a large leather chair, a bottle of strong-smelling liquor on the table beside him, half empty. He wasn't drunk, but he was weary, his posture defeated. He was staring at a map of the territories spread across his desk, but his eyes were unfocused, lost in the past. She took a tentative step into the room. Kyle? His head snapped up, his senses instantly alert. The weary wolf was gone, replaced by the guarded Alpha. What are you doing here? I couldn't sleep, she said softly, her hands twisting in front of her. We can't go on like this. The pack is waiting. I am waiting. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Waiting for what? For me to thank you? For me to tell you it was all worth it? He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. Do you have any idea what it was like, Ilara? The cold, the hunger, the absolute certainty that I was utterly alone, that the one person I trusted had ripped my soul out for sport. I used that. I took that hate and I forged it into a weapon, into armor. It's what kept me alive. And you took it away from me in a single breath. You left me with nothing. You are not nothing, she cried, stepping toward him. You are the Alpha this pack has needed for years. You are strong. You are a leader. I am a monster you created, he roared, turning on her, his face a mask of anguish. Everything I am is because of that lie. And now I look at you and I don't know what to feel. The bond, it screams for me to claim you, to protect you, to finish the ceremony. But my mind is a graveyard of the man I could have been if you had just trusted me. The pain in his voice was a physical blow. This was the fracture, the true breaking point. His identity was shattered, and he was blaming her for it. Tears streamed down her face. Trust you? She whispered, her own voice rising with a decade of suppressed grief. Trust you to do what? Fight my father? Kale, you were 17. He was the Alpha. He would have killed you, and he would have called it justice. I was a 16-year-old girl, and I had to choose between your life and our love. There was no good choice. There was no way for us to win. All I could do was save you. They stood there, chests heaving, the raw, ugly truth of their past finally laid bare between them. The air crackled with their shared pain. Suddenly, a frantic pounding on the study door broke the spell. A young Stonecrest wolf burst in, his eyes wide with panic. Alpha, rogues, a large group, crossing the northern border. They've already hit the outlying farms. They're led by a massive shifter. He's calling himself the true Alpha of the Blackwood. Kale's head snapped toward the wolf, the personal turmoil instantly replaced by the sharp focus of a commander. How many? Dozens, Alpha, at least 30, and they fight with a savagery I've never seen. Ilara's blood ran cold. The chaos of the leadership challenge, the fracture between Kale and her, it had left them vulnerable. Someone was taking advantage of it. Lachlan, it had to be. He must have had allies, a shadow pack loyal to her father's cruel legacy, waiting for a moment of weakness. Kale was already moving, grabbing a wicked-looking blade from the wall. "Rally the warriors. Meet me at the north gate in 5 minutes. Send a runner to the western flank. Tell them to circle around and cut off their retreat." His voice was calm, lethal. The broken man was gone, replaced by the warrior Alpha. He strode toward the door, but Ilara grabbed his arm. "Kale, wait!" He looked down at her hand, then at her face. His eyes were still filled with conflict, but now there was a grim urgency there as well. "This is not the time, Ilara." "Lachlan will be there," she said, her voice low and certain. "He knows this land. He knows the pack's weaknesses. He knows your mind is not on the battle. He's counting on you being distracted." "I am never distracted when it comes to a fight," he growled. "He will use me to distract you," she pressed, her grip tightening. A flicker of something, fear, protectiveness, crossed his face. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the source of his pain, but a partner, a strategist, the Luna he had claimed. "Stay here. Lock the door," he commanded. "No," she said, her voice firm, resolute. The passive girl who had accepted her fate for 10 years was gone. "I am the daughter of an Alpha. I know these woods better than anyone. I know the hunting trails Lachlan will use as ambush points. You need me." He stared at her, a silent battle raging in his eyes. To protect her by sending her away, or to trust her by his side? It was the same choice she had faced 10 years ago, but in reverse. His jaw clenched. "Fine," he bit out, "but you do exactly as I say. You are not a warrior." He turned to the young wolf. "Give her a blade, and 2 of my best guards. They will not leave her side." As the wolf handed her a dagger, her fingers wrapped around the cool leather hilt, it felt surprisingly natural. This was it. The past was behind them, a storm of pain and regret. The future was uncertain. All that mattered was the present, the fight for their pack, for their lives. And for the first time, they would face it together. The scent of blood and wet earth filled the air. The battle raged at the edge of the forest, a chaotic symphony of snarls, clashing steel, and cries of pain. Kale fought like a force of nature, a whirlwind of claws and fury at the heart of the conflict. His stone-crest wolves, loyal and disciplined, formed a deadly perimeter around him, while the Blackwood warriors, initially hesitant, were inspired by his raw power and fought with a renewed sense of purpose. Ilara stayed on the periphery as commanded, flanked by her 2 massive guards, her mind racing. She wasn't a fighter, but she was an Alpha's daughter. She watched Lachlan, who, just as she'd predicted, wasn't engaging Kale directly. He was leading small, vicious raids on the flanks, trying to disorganize their lines, creating chaos. He was looking for an opening. He was looking for her. "The ridge," she said suddenly to her guards. "He's going to try and circle around through the game trail that leads to that ridge. From there, he'll have a clear path to the rear line." The guards, named Fen and Rorik, exchanged a look. They were Kale's wolves, loyal only to him. "The Alpha's orders were to stay put," Fen grunted. "The Alpha's orders were to protect me," she countered, her voice sharp with authority she didn't know she possessed. "Lachlan is coming for me. Do we wait for him to get here and endanger everyone, or do we cut him off?" Rorik nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with respect. "The Luna is right. It is a better tactical position." They moved swiftly and silently through the undergrowth, away from the main battle. The sounds of the fight grew more distant, replaced by the eerie quiet of the deep woods. They reached the base of the ridge just as Ilara saw movement above them. It was Lachlan and 3 of his brutish rogues, scrambling up the rocks. "Now!" she yelled. Fen and Rorik exploded from the trees, shifting mid-stride into their massive wolf forms. They slammed into 2 of the rogues, a maelstrom of fur and teeth. Ilara, her heart pounding, scrambled up the rocks after them, her dagger held tight. Lachlan had been taken by surprise. He turned, his face a mask of rage as he saw her. The last rogue moved to intercept her, but Lachlan waved him off. "Her," he snarled, his eyes fixed on Ilara. "She's mine." He lunged at her. She was no match for his strength, but she was agile. She dodged his first clumsy attack, the tip of his blade slicing the air where her throat had been. She remembered her father's tedious training sessions, lessons in footwork and balance she had hated but now desperately needed. She used the uneven terrain to her advantage, keeping her distance, looking for an opening. Below them, the battle howled. She could hear Kale's roar, a sound of pure fury, and she knew he must have realized she was gone. He would be coming. She just had to survive until then. Lachlan feinted left and came in from the right. His arm snaked out and grabbed her wrist, twisting it brutally. She cried out as the dagger fell from her numb fingers. He slammed her back against a rock wall, his foul breath hot on her face. "Did you think you could win?" he spat. "You and that rogue pretender. This pack belongs to the old ways, to a true Blackwood alpha. Once he's dead and you're my mate, they will all fall in line." "They will never follow a coward like you," she gasped, struggling against his grip. His eyes blazed. "I'm not the coward." He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. "I'm the one who suggested the plan to your father. Threaten the boy," he said. "No," I told him. "A threat isn't enough. Make her the weapon. Make her break him. It was my idea, little Luna. The entire decade of your misery, you have me to thank for it." The confession hit her with the force of a physical blow. A red wave of rage washed over her, pure and cleansing. It burned away the last of her fear. With a scream of fury, she brought her knee up hard into his groin. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She shoved him back, creating space, and dove for her fallen dagger. Before she could reach it, a black-furred missile of rage launched itself from the trees below and slammed into Lachlan. It was Kale in his full wolf form, a beast of shadow and muscle, twice Lachlan's size. The impact sent both of them tumbling down the short, rocky incline. Ilara scrambled to the edge, her heart in her throat. Below, the 2 wolves tore at each other. But Lachlan was desperate. As Kale lunged for his throat, Lachlan twisted, and his claws, undoubtedly tipped with silver he'd embedded into them, raked across Kale's side. Kale roared in pain, the silver burning his flesh. He staggered back, the wound deep and smoking. Lachlan saw his chance. He shifted back into his human form, grabbing a jagged rock. Kale was struggling to shift back, weakened by the silver poisoning. Ilara didn't think. She acted. She launched herself off the ridge, landing with a jarring impact near the 2 men. She grabbed her dagger from the ground and threw herself at Lachlan just as he raised the rock to crush Kael's skull. She plunged the dagger deep into Lachlan's shoulder. He howled in pain and fury, dropping the rock and swatting her away like a fly. She hit the ground hard, her head striking a stone. Black spots danced in her vision. Through the haze, she saw Kyle finally manage to shift back. He was bleeding, his face pale, but his eyes were blazing with a terrifying protective fire she had never seen before. He looked at her, lying crumpled on the ground, and then at Lachlan, who was pulling the dagger from his own shoulder. A primal roar tore from Kyle's throat. He moved with a speed that was inhuman. He didn't just fight Lachlan, he dismantled him. Every bit of his rage, his pain, his 10 years of suffering was unleashed in a torrent of focused, brutal violence. He broke Lachlan's arm, then his leg, disabling him with chilling precision. He ended the fight with his hand around Lachlan's throat, lifting him into the air. "This is for her," Kyle growled, his voice a low, terrifying promise. "For every day you let her suffer. For every night I spent hating her because of your poison." He squeezed, and there was a final, wet crack. He dropped the body as if it were trash. The battle was over. The remaining rogues, seeing their leader fall, had been routed by the combined force of the two packs. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the panting of wolves and the groans of the wounded. Kyle ignored all of it. He stumbled over to Ilara, falling to his knees beside her. The deep silver gashes on his side were weeping blood, but his only concern was her. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice raw with panic. Are you hurt?" He gently turned her over. Her head was bleeding, but her eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, at his face, streaked with dirt and blood. His eyes filled with a desperate, terrified love. "You came," she whispered, a weak smile touching her lips. "Always," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "From now on, I will always come for you." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and in front of the entire pack, surrounded by the carnage of their first victory together, he lowered his head to her neck. He hesitated for a heartbeat, his eyes meeting hers, a silent question passing between them. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He pressed his lips to the juncture of her neck and shoulder. There was a sharp, brief sting of pain, followed by a tidal wave of warmth, of energy, of pure, unadulterated belonging. It flooded her senses, connecting her to him on every level, mind, body, and soul. The mate bond, stretched and frayed for a decade, snapped into place, solid and unbreakable, a blazing golden cord that tied them together forever. He pulled back, his eyes glowing with the bond's power. "Mine," he growled, the word no longer a threat of possession, but a sacred, eternal vow. "Yours," she whispered back, her hand coming up to cup his blood-stained cheek. The pain in her head faded, replaced by the overwhelming feeling of being home. Finally, truly home. A month later, the pack was healing. The last vestiges of her father's cruel regime had been purged, and the Blackwood and Stonecrest wolves were slowly, cautiously, becoming one pack under one alpha. Kyle ruled with a strength and fairness that inspired fierce loyalty. The fear was gone, replaced by respect. Ilara stood beside him not as a symbol or a trophy, but as a true Luna. She had a voice, and the pack listened. She organized the healers, helped rehome the families displaced by the rogue attack, and worked with Lyra to create a council of elders to advise the Alpha. She had found her place, her purpose, and her strength. Tonight, she stood on the balcony of their chambers, the same balcony where she had once felt so trapped. The cool night air felt like a promise on her skin. She heard the door open and close softly, and then Kyle was behind her, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a familiar comfort. "The scouts reported back from the southern territories," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Everything is quiet. The lands are secure." "Good," she sighed, leaning into him. "The pack can finally feel safe." "We can finally feel safe," he corrected softly. He turned her in his arms to face him. The moonlight cast silver light on his features, softening the hard lines and illuminating the scar over his eye. It was no longer a mark of vengeance, but a part of the man she loved, the man she had always loved. He gently traced the faint, silvery lines of the mating mark on her neck. "Does it ever fade?" "Never," she whispered, her own hand coming up to touch the deep, puckered scar on his side from Lachlan's silvered claws. It would never fully heal, a permanent reminder of the battle that had finally brought them together. "Does this ever stop hurting?" "Only when you touch it," he admitted, his voice raw with an honesty that was still new to them. He captured her hand and pressed a kiss into her palm. "I wasted so much time, Alara, so many years lost to anger." "We found our way back," she said, her voice full of a certainty that soothed the old ache in his soul. "We're not the boy and girl who met by the willow tree anymore. We're stronger. We were forged in the fire." He nodded, his gray eyes deep and full of an emotion that still stole her breath away. "I love you," he said. The words weren't a command or a claim, but a simple, profound truth. "I think, even when I hated you, I loved you." "I know," she smiled, a true, radiant smile. "I loved you even when I was terrified of you." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was nothing like their first stolen moments in the woods, nor was it the desperate claiming after the battle. This was a kiss of peace, of promise. It spoke of quiet mornings and shared burdens, of leadership and partnership, of a future built together from the ashes of a painful past. He pulled away, resting his forehead against hers. They stood there in the quiet of the night, Alpha and Luna, two halves of a whole, finally at peace. Below them, the valley slept under a blanket of moonlight. The air no longer smelled of just pine and winter storm, nor of blood and fear. It smelled of wood smoke, of damp earth, of healing. It smelled of home.